Massimo, thanks a lot for joining us today. I really appreciate the opportunity to sit down and chat. Perhaps just to start, you'll take us through a little bit about yourself and your career and the organization that you work in.
I've been in the sport industry for many years, more than 20 years. First a job with Wilson Sporting Goods, where it was in different areas. It was in commercial, it was in sponsorship, in marketing and business development. Then went on to work for the parent company of Wilson, a Finnish corporation called Sports Group. Worked in product for a little while there. Ended up going back to Wilson and finally landed in Nike in 2011, which was my last job. Prior to joining the ATP, I was in Nike for almost 10 years. I arrived at the ATP at the beginning of 2020. A very interesting time. I think we started back in January 2020 with bushfires in Australia, followed by the disruption of COVID that we had to deal with pretty much until now. And finally, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, which obviously is creating also a lot of stress and disruption. At the same time, we've been able, throughout the last 3 years, it's been almost 3 years now, to pretty much implement the largest number of changes and reforms that the ATP has gone through in a long, long time. I would venture to say since its inception. So very excited about that. And look, we're talking about strategy. I think one of the reasons why we have been able to do that is because we've been very consistent and resilient in going back to our initial strategic plan, which was developed by our chairman, Andrea, back in 2019. It has been ultimately our North Star, and it's been what has been guiding us for the last 3 years. And despite of all the disruptions and curveballs and challenges that we had, we kept going with it. So very excited to be here to say that we managed to approve phase one of one vision.
And with what you've taken us through then, there's a definite sporting element throughout your career, I suppose, intertwined as you've gone along with increasing responsibility in a business sense. Is there any inspiration that you think you can draw, and especially working within the ATP, that you can draw from the sporting world in terms of how athletes have to implement strategy and how you and the organization now have to implement strategy?
I think, look, it's a combination of being firm and sticking to the strategy, staying focused to where you think it's the right plan, with a little bit of ability to adjust when adjustments are needed, right? One of the former presidents of Nike used to tell me that a strategy is a strategy not because you change it every day, right? So if every 3 months you revise your strategy and you're taking a different direction, then probably it's not a strategy. So I think there is an element where you have to be a little bit stubborn, and if you believe that you've done the right work and can put in place the right strategy, ultimately you want to stick to it. Having said that, there is also an element of flexibility that some tweaks and adjustments have to be made, right? The world changes fast. There are developments in technology and in digital and in many other areas. So there has to be an element of staying nimble, I would say. So that's probably the big takeaway from.
Okay, and taking a step back just for a moment, as you told us at the beginning, your career has spanned a few different areas. How has work in strategy, but in a more general sense, engaging with team members, engaging with the organization, how has that changed over time for you?
I used to work in very large corporations, so I think you have a lot of structure in place in a company like Nike, a company with lots of structure, lots of processes, and I think there is obviously clarity of the overall direction, but sometimes even small movements are very hard to happen because you need to steer a gigantic structure. And I think it's very different in the ATP. It's a much smaller company. We're approximately 300 people. I think here we tend to be very dynamic, but the challenge is more to stay focused on what really matters, right? We tend to be caught up in a million projects, initiatives, different ideas, and on its face, everything seems to be relevant and important and creating value. But the reality is that it's not, right? So we need to go back and ultimately stick for what really matters. So I would say very different dynamics based on the size and the age of a company.
Focusing on the ATP just for a moment, just finished up in Turin, finals, huge event, very exciting event, and a fantastic year. Are there any initiatives, certain priorities, 2023 and beyond that you're most excited or maybe proud about?
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned earlier, we managed to approve phase one of One Vision. So very excited about that. We have a little bit of momentum, but what we see the bigger opportunity is the broader tennis ecosystem, what we call the T7, so the four Grand Slams, WTA, ATP, and ITF. We've been doing a significant amount of work in the space, trying to build an open dialogue with these other entities. But that's where we truly see the opportunity for the sport in the long term. We sort of feel that with phase one of our strategic plan of One Vision, we sort of got our house in order, and now we're focusing more and more outside boundaries of the ATP. I think the most exciting part of that is we think that tennis is an incredible opportunity. Tennis is an incredible platform. So we're gonna be very bullish about the future, and hopefully working collaboratively with the other entities will be able to do some good for the longer term future of tennis.
And with that in mind, and with all the exciting initiatives coming into play, are there any key challenges that you believe that yourself and the wider team have to overcome? Maybe also taking into mind, the external challenges that you're alluding to at the beginning. Are there any specific challenges that you think everyone needs to overcome to achieve the goals?
There is, I would call it, a high degree of fragmentation. You have a number of entities, but you have a very large and diverse group of stakeholders. Often, as you see what the ATP does, represents the interest of all tennis players and all tennis tournaments. So you can imagine it's truly spread globally, and you have a very diverse and large mix of stakeholders. So that's not easy to sort of align everyone to one strategy that ultimately represents the interest of every single constituent. It's not on his desk. The other thing I would call out, obviously, the global nature of the sport makes it a little bit exposed to being macro trends. So things like COVID obviously impacted tennis probably more than other sports, because we have a little bit of a traveling circus jumping from one country to the other. So that has an impact also. I think the very nature of the ATP also is somehow sometimes challenging, in the sense that we are a governing body, right? We are the league responsible for running the circuit, but at the same time, there is also an aspect of trying to commercialize the men's professional tennis. So sometimes finding the right identity, which again, shooting for our strategy, can be challenging. So those are probably the three things that we'll call out.
Okay, great. And I'm going to challenge you just to think back for just a minute or two. But if you were able to transport yourself back 5-10 years and talk to yourself then, knowing what you know now about strategy work and everything you've done in that time, what would you say? What advice would you give yourself 5 or 10 years previous?
I would do fewer things. I think it comes down to focusing and also thinking about the bigger picture. A little bit the point I was trying to make earlier, right? Let's face it, you have a million ideas and initiatives that seem to make sense, but do they really create a lot of value? So I think that's a little bit probably the one thing that I would change. You do a lot of work, but how much of it creates real, meaningful value? So the ability to say no, right? Somebody comes up with an idea, oh yeah, your own idea. And it seems like, why we're not doing this? But then the reality is, even in one of the workshops that we did with you guys, you end up putting on the wall all the initiatives, all the projects that you're working on. You realize that it's a lot. The breadth of it's a lot. So totally going back, I'll try to be a little bit down.
And what's been the value of, that you felt the value of our work together with you?
I think, as I mentioned earlier, that aspect of ownership from everyone, because I think the importance of creating the link between the overarching strategy and staff across the entire company. I think how we started developing that through workshops, I think has incredible value. That the opportunity to then translate that overarching strategy into an actionable plan for everyone, and most importantly, into goals and objectives that everyone can be very clear about. And then finally, the fact that you have one single repository for corporate strategy, right? That there is a place where you can go ultimately, and day in, day out, you sort of create that level of access and visibility to everyone in the company.
And I asked you just before to go 5-10 years in the past, and now I'm going to ask you just for the last question to go a couple of years into the future. What does strategy work look like for you in 5-10 years, and what does the ATP in tennis look like for you in 5-10 years?
I think you see incredible changes happening overnight. So I keep saying, I said in the very beginning, posting one of the forward presidents, Mikey, that it will be a strategy for change every 3 months. Having said that, I think that you have to be able to put into your strategy capacity to make changes, because things can truly change overnight. So I think greater flexibility will be required. The other aspect which we see today, I think we have to wait 5 years, is the fact that you cannot ignore the impact on society and community when it comes not to develop with purpose strategy. So ultimately that has to be not even taken into account, I think it has to be weaved into pretty much every decision that you make. So I think probably for the next few years, those are going to be the two biggest changes that I would expect.
Okay, great. And final question from me. What are you most excited about in the world of tennis moving forward?
My biggest hope is that we'll continue to focus on the bigger picture, we'll continue to think big. Our chairman gave a presentation in Turin a couple of weeks ago where he was talking about the fighting space, which is normally what we tend to focus on, which is our day-to-day stuff and mainly our neighbors. But ultimately, we operate in a much larger industry, which is the entertainment industry. So my hope and what ultimately makes it exciting is the fact that we have a big opportunity out there. There's a big market, which is the entertainment industry, and I hope we'll have to do some good work there.
Great. Well, it's all very, very exciting, and really appreciate the opportunity to come and speak to you today. Really appreciate the opportunity for the work that we get to do together, and excited and looking forward to what's to come. Thanks, Massimo. Thank you.